Hi, welcome to the Pole Shift News. Let's have a look at something, guys. As we can see today, there is no sunspots on the disk. That's visible. The geomagnetic field's quiet, and we've got a normal amount of solar X-rays. We can see that when we look at the KP index, the proton flux, and X-rays on those charts there. We can also see it when we look at these live photos of the disk in different filters. So, is it normal or abnormal at this point in time? Well, if you was only looking at the solar cycles at the point where they come to an end, say around 2020, it's actually happening around now. I think it's more fitting on this best estimated line, the lower one on solar cycle 24. But you would expect there to be a lot less sunspots at this point in time. It's actually been that way for quite some time. Because we've been having periods over the last few years, at least when we look at this picture here of the disk in March 2009 and compare it with the sunspots around 2000, you can see there was a lot more. There's a big difference. So you could say, okay, we're at the end of a solar cycle, things must be normal. But if you look at the previous solar cycles to that, you'll see there's a bit of a difference. We can see that they're dropping off, and they have been doing so for at least since the 1990s. So the last 3 solar cycles have showed a trend of the sunspots dropping off. We know that when the sunspots drop off, the temperature also drops off as well. And it could be due to a lot of facts. I mean, one fact could be that when the sunspots are low in numbers, the sun production is low, therefore the heliosphere, which the sun inflates, which protects our solar system, is also being reduced. And as a result of that, we get more cosmic radiation inbound into our solar system. If you add in a magnetic pole shift, then the magnetosphere is going to weaken, which is what we're now monitoring, the magnetosphere, and we're also monitoring the progression of the magnetic poles over the northern hemisphere, because at the moment it's said to be about 20% less than what it was 50 years ago. We've been following the magnetic pole shift now for the last 100 years, looking at the data and following the track of the magnetic pole over the northern hemisphere. In some videos I've showed you the pins going over Google Earth. You can see it's moving, and more recently, up until I'd say the last couple of years, it has been moving faster and faster and covering therefore more distance in short periods of time, which would be an indication that we are getting close to a specific mark, say 40 degrees, where the magnetic poles might at that point go into the weak field lines and migrate quicker. But there's something else at the moment which a lot of people are talking about on YouTube and other forms of media, and that is the grand solar minimum. And that is largely due to charts that we can see here, which indicate periods of time such as the Maunder minimum and the Dalton minimum when sunspots was at their lowest and temperature followed likewise. Now, you might say to yourself, well, we've got a lot of climatologists, at least from the 80s, stating that we was in, a global warming state, and the reason for that was probably related to CO2 in the atmosphere. It wasn't many millions of years ago that the entire atmosphere of Earth was consistent of mainly CO2, and it scrubbed that CO2 out of the atmosphere and added oxygen in a process where these cellular life forms absorbed the CO2 and as a byproduct put the oxygen into the atmosphere. It made it suitable for species like ours and many others to walk on the land and breathe oxygen. So you could say that having CO2 in the atmosphere is actually a good thing. And if you put more CO2 into the atmosphere, I'm sure these cellular bioorganisms are going to thrive on it, as well as those plants and vegetations on the surface of land are going to thrive, because at the end of the day they are consistent mainly of CO2. So they're a good storage or a good scrubbing agent in that it removes the CO2 from the atmosphere and stores it in wood and other vegetation like that. And then perhaps over many, many millions of years, it's going to convert it into coal. And then, species such as ours are going to come along, set fire to that coal in order to kick off an industrial revolution, and then we're going to start adding more CO2 back to the atmosphere. But there's a point that I wanted to make. We can see that when sunspots increase, we get warmer climates, and if we look just recently over the last 3 solar cycles, we can see them dropping off. And we can see that we're almost at levels of the Dalton minimum, if not below that. And this has been a consistent trend, not just for the last 40, 50 years on this planet. This has been a trend for at least 11,000 years. I want to point out something. Around 11,000 years ago, we was in a glacial period. And right now, we're still in a ice age. And we've been in that ice age for around 2.4 million years. I know some of you might find that really hard to believe, especially if you're seeing these charts of sunspot observations, and then you're seeing that at the bottom there where it says the little ice age. You'll think that we only go into the little ice ages when the sunspot's hit 0, and that's not the case. We've actually been in an ice age for 2.4 million years. And I've said recently in a video that we're possibly going back into a glacial period, and I wanted to just show you why I thought that that is the case. If we look at the temperature record over millions of years and just concentrate what's happened over the last 90 million years, we'll be in this region here. If we look at the black line, which is the long-term average, the blue line is the short-term average, we can see that from the last 90 million years it has been dropping off. And you can see that when it does do that and goes below the 0, and if it stays in those periods for prolonged periods of times, then we go into what's called a glacial period. And that can last even millions of years in itself. This would change the way we conduct business and all of the species on this planet if that happens in a short period of time. If we go into a prolonged glacial period, and it's not uncommon for this Earth to do so, I'm just pointing out the fact that, you can see the trend. The last 90 million years, we've seen the temperature dropping on this planet. The last 11,000 years, we've not only seen the temperature doing still in a negative fashion dropping off, but we've also seen sunspots dropping off. And then if we look at most recent years, we see the sunspots dropping back off to a period probably associated with the Dalton and Maunder minimum. And we know that from the Maunder minimum, what was a result of the sunspots being at an all-time low was temperatures at all times low. But on top of that, we could be thinking that the grand solar minimums are just time periods which last short ranges of time, but they could actually be grand solar minimums, could be actually grander than that, and they could last 100 million years or so. We don't know what the sun's disk looked like 100 million years ago, but if it's to go on the observations that have been made at least over the last 400 years, then we could say that our sun could be considerably more active than what it has been back 90 million years ago than what it is today. And we could possibly see that activity dropping off to 0, and as a result we could see the temperatures also following suit. As the gradual decline in activity of the sun continues, then so does temperature. But like I say, glacial periods last a lot longer, and most of the northern hemisphere will definitely have to change the way in which it conducts its business. It's going to be very difficult for human beings at that point in time, because we have never had so many human beings on the planet dependent on food sources, crops, as well as a lot of other things like I talked in the last video, just concerning human beings. I mean, we've overpopulated ourselves with regards to at least the technological advancement and the surplus of labour that we're seeing right now. This is going to continue to get worse, and when you throw in food shortages, then it's going to get even worse. I can't help it, guys, but to deviate from, the obvious of what we're looking at. We're looking at these climate records going back millions of years, and we can see that we are definitely facing another glacial period. And we've been talking about it for the last 7 years. Now we're at the point where it's actually taking place. It's just unbelievable. You add in the big point I always mention about the magnetic pole reversal. That being, the last time it took place was 780,000 years. Prior to this, it used to take reversal processes every 350,000 years. But this time, it's extended it by another 500,000 years. And why is that? As something slowed down in the core of this planet. Is this core of the planet? Don't want to be alarmist in any way, but is it stalled? And is this the last time we're going to go for a reversal? And even at the worst, if it slowed down the process, does that mean the actual process of the reversal will actually be slower as well? Because, during the reversal, when the magnetic field lines cross from strong to weak, things are supposed to happen very quickly. But if things have slowed down and we're in that weak field line transition, where the poles are migrating very slowly, the magnetosphere will be at its weakest. When that happens, we're subject to atmospheric sputtering. And if you go on to Pole Shift News in the Learning Centre, you'll see what atmospheric sputtering does to an atmosphere. And if this is a prolonged thing, it could be also a planetary destructive force, such as what would happen in our case. It could copy what happened already in our solar system with another neighbouring planet, Mars. It's clear Mars had water on its surface. It's clear at some point it had a magnetic field. Through probes flying over it, discovering recent impact craters, we're able to pick up some traces of magnetic fields that way. We know it had a magnetic field at some point. It no longer has. Now, could this be what we're looking at on this planet? If so, it doesn't just dramatically change the outcome for our species, but for pretty much the whole diversity across all ranges. And this is why this topic is probably the most important topic of your time. All these changes are going to take effect at some point, and we're going to witness the outcomes of all this. And I'm sorry, but I couldn't paint a silver lining over the clouds and say it's going to be a great time, because it's going to be very hard. It's going to be a struggle. Even if the worst case scenario doesn't happen, it's still going to be very difficult times ahead for many people, and we're already starting to see it, and we're not even in that full glacial period. I mean, I pointed it out in the last video I made that, elderly people in one of the 7th richest countries of this world were burning their furniture just to keep warm only a few weeks ago in the United Kingdom. And, if the governments of this world do not get a grip soon, it's going to get worse for a lot more people. You can't depend on a monetary system just because you're one of the 1% that are enjoying, the benefits of being very wealthy in this system. The capitalist system is not based just for 1% of the people. It should be for the whole of the colony, so that everyone in the colony can enjoy it. But we're making so many grand mistakes at the moment, guys. It's unbelievable. Shocking. It's what I suppose spurs videos like I made the other day. The real extent of this is not known to the majority of the people on this earth. They are walking around oblivious to what is happening, and yet hopefully I've made it clear to you guys it is happening. The magnetic pole shift should be something mentioned more frequently in mainstream media, and it is not. And yet these organisations are aware of it. They know exactly what to look at with regards to, just the grand solar minimum that we're experiencing right now. They know it. because back in 2010 they was making charts of, space weather. But the companies that was presenting these charts to the public, guess what companies they were? Stock market companies. And it's no wonder that they were making use of this information, because if you're in stock markets buying futures of crops, you're going to know that the future crops are going to become less and less productive and therefore more valuable. It's like, if there's a surplus of money in a system, it's not worth a lot. You're paying twice as much for everything as what you normally are. Same thing. So, the pigs have already been exploiting this anomaly that's taking place. And can you believe it? These pigs are exploiting a possible catastrophe. It's like they're placing the odds on this catastrophe happening so that they can profit from it. This is the mentality of people we've got living on this planet, that will see any opportunity to make money, regardless of whether it's going to spell disaster for pretty much the majority of the population on this earth. That's the attitude and mentality of people today. It's shocking. And, there doesn't seem to be any short-term fix for this problem. These people are not going to give up cash. Automatically, the governments are not going to instruct their media companies, such as the BBC, NBC, and all the other networks that are mainstream news, to all of a sudden start revealing to people what's about to happen. Because, as you can imagine, there would be wild-scale panic. Do you think people would take out a mortgage for the next 25 years if they knew they weren't going to be able to secure a job to keep that mortgage going? In other words, short term they'll be able to keep it going whilst things are, even at this period of time, weak economically, but long term the banks are going to cash in on the house and their labour. So, guys, I'm going to end the video here. I think I've made a point or two about the importance of the topic, and I'm just going to mention that there's a link down there if you want to support this research. And I'll say what I usually do as well. Enjoy the rest of your week, and bye for now.